In this box is a bunch of retro Alienware gaming computer stuff. And when I say retro, it is about 10 years old. And in computer years, that's pretty ancient. But we're going to check some of this out now. We're going to save some of it for a later date. So go ahead and hit that subscribe button if you want to see some more of this Alienware stuff. But we're going to test some of it out now, see how it runs, and see what we can do with it today. Because this is a pretty unique setup, and I'm excited to show it to you. Hey everybody, it's Chris from Family Geekery, and today we're going to be checking out, like I said, some of this Alienware stuff that's in here. Now this box came to me like this from a local guy, nice young man who had this stuff when he was a kid, I guess, and went off to join the military, said he didn't need the stuff anymore, and I picked it up from him, and it's all in really good shape. So we're going to check it out, we're going to play around with it, we're going to see what it can still do, and some of the stuff we may have to upgrade a little bit, and some of the stuff may be good to go how it is, but let's have some fun with it. So let me go ahead and open this up and pull out the first couple pieces. Alright, the first thing I'm going to grab out of the box here is this guy right here. This is an Alienware Alpha. In fact, this is an Alpha, I believe they call it the R2, and this is a little bit newer than the original Alpha. In fact, I've had several of the original Alphas. Here's one right here, and this was, I believe, like a third generation i3, and it had a graphics card in it, but it wasn't a very super graphics card. It was great for its time. Again, this stuff's over 10 years old. So they look very much the same on the outside, a little different on the inside. In fact, if we look at the back here, we're going to notice a little difference real quick. Here's the R1 that I've had for many years. On the back, we've got a couple USB ports, Ethernet port, optical port, two HDMIs. One's an HDMI in, one's an HDMI out. And that's because this thing was originally meant to be kind of like in your entertainment center. You would pipe in your TV, maybe your cable box or something into the in port, and then you would pipe this out to your TV so that you can actually control maybe your TV through your gaming system and stuff. And then a power port. Now if we take that and we look at this new R2, we got, again, optical port, a couple USBs, Ethernet, a couple HDMIs for the same purpose, a power port, and then we've got this guy here, and that's going to be very important. So this one I think is more like a 6th generation i-series, a little bit more capable both in the CPU, and the GPU is going to be a little bit stronger too. So we'll take a look at all those specs and see what it can do. That's the first piece from this. So let's see what else we got. So next up we've got this guy, and this is an Alienware 14. So this is a laptop obviously, and we've still got some of the specs written on the back side here. So it says NVIDIA GeForce GT 750 with 2 gigs of DDR5 with an Intel Core i5 4210. So this right here is a very similar generation to the first generation Alpha that I showed you. It's going to be very capable of the same type of stuff, but it's in really good condition. It's built like a freaking tank. And the keyboard, I love this keyboard. You get so spoiled by old keyboards like this when you start using the little butterfly keys of modern keyboards. But we're going to take a look at this in a different video. We're going to focus on this thing, but I've got one more piece to add to that. So far we got ourselves a laptop, we got ourselves a little desktop, and then next up we've got this thing. So this, if you don't recognize it right away, is the Alienware Graphics Amplifier, sometimes called the AGA. And it's basically an eGPU, an external GPU. And inside here is going to be a GPU and a power supply to run it. We're going to have a special cable to go from here to either this Alpha over here or to a compatible laptop. Unfortunately, the laptop that we got with this setup was not one of the compatible ones. I think it was one series too old. But we're going to plug this thing into that in this video. And what we're going to do is we're going to boot this thing up by itself, the Alpha by itself, run some tests on it, see what the specs are, and then we're going to hook up the graphics amplifier and see how much benefit it gives us for gaming. So let's go ahead and get this off the bench. Let's boot that up and take a look at it. Alright, so here it is with its beautiful little Alienware logo, and this is running. Let's go ahead and take a look at the specs real quick. So starting off with the Intel Core i7 6700T CPU, 16 gigabytes of RAM, Looks like we got a 1 terabyte spinning hard drive, a SATA hard drive, and a 240 gigabyte SSD for boot. And then we've got a GTX 960, which is a 4 gigabyte GPU. So not the highest specs in the world, but for its time, 10 years ago, this thing would be pretty darn capable. Now again, this thing was sold by itself as a gaming computer, and it could certainly game with those specs. And what we're going to do is we're going to run this 3D Mark software, just running the time spy test, and we're going to get some both GPU and CPU numbers off of that, and then we're going to compare and contrast that once we add that graphics amplifier. So let's go ahead and boot up this 3D Mark, and let's run the test. Now I own the full version of this 3D Mark software, and I've got it through Steam, but I hate installing Steam on every computer that I test, so I usually just go ahead and download this free version, which just has Time Spy by itself. So that's what we're going to run here today. So this Time Spy demo is going to go through kind of a warm-up phase here, and then it's going to go through a GPU test 1, a GPU test 2, and then it's going to go through more of a targeted CPU test. So I'm going to go ahead and let these run, and I'll be back with the results. Alright, so we are done with the little warm-up phase, and we are into the graphics test number 1, and you can hear the fan probably kick up on this thing a little bit. Now this thing's got 2 little fans in here, one for the CPU and one for the GPU, and they're spinning up pretty good right now. And we're looking at about 12 frames per second down here, which isn't stellar, but again, this is older technology, and it looks okay. So let's go ahead and let this run, like I said, and we'll be back with the results. Alright, so we got some results here. We got a 2174 on the overall score. That's a 2031 with the graphics score, a 3630 with the CPU score. And at the end of all this, I'm going to have a little comparison slide to show everything so you don't have to memorize these numbers. But I really like what the software does with the charts that it shows you at the end, where it shows you kind of the GPU temperature, the CPU temperature, the load for each of them throughout the course of the test. And it gives you a lot of good information as you scroll down through here. So like I said, we'll look at these scores compared up to the scores that we get once we add the graphics amplifier. So let's go ahead and hook that thing up, and we'll take a look at it next. Alright, now before I hook up the amplifier, I'll show you some things on the back side of it, but I want to show you this cable first. This is a proprietary cable that hooks up the amplifier to either your Alpha desktop or the laptop. And like I said, this is a proprietary cable. If you're looking at getting some kind of setup like this, make sure it has the cable, because that's going to make all the difference. Without this, that amplifier does nothing, obviously, and these things are incredibly hard to find. I've seen them for sale on some, secondhand sites for like $200, and if you ask me, that's just not worth it. So make sure you do have one of these and make sure it is working. So with that being said, let me go ahead and show you the amplifier. So you saw the pretty face of it with the Alienware logo on it. This is the back side. Here's our GPU in here. It's got a 2-slot size GPU in here. This happens to be a GTX 1080 Founders Edition. And we also have some USB ports back here. This is where that special proprietary cable is going to plug in. And of course, this is the power supply. And this power supply is going to be enough to power this 1080 no problem. You can probably even power up to a 2080 with it. But if you start going any higher than that, you will want to replace that power supply that's in there. And there is, I believe, a Corsair model that kind of lines up with the right hole and everything. It's like a 650 watt, but we're not going to worry about that right now. We're just going to run with what's in there, which is a 1080, which should be plenty of speed to see some kind of an improvement over that 960. And yeah, let's go ahead and hook it up and boot it up. All right, so I've booted it up with the graphics cable, the HDMI cable still plugged into here. Now you can see with that special cable plugged in, this thing knows that I booted up the computer. I didn't have to push any power switch on this. I just gave power to this, hooked up the cable, booted up the computer, and it turned on. Now because I haven't moved the cable over yet, it's not using this GPU. It's still using the GTX 960, and it's telling me here that if I want to use the graphics amplifier, I'm going to have to reboot. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to move the cable over after I click yes here, and that should boot us up using the 1080. Alright, so all I did was I moved the cable, I clicked yes on the reboot, I moved the cable over here while it was rebooting, and it came up and it has the display now. You can see that the resolution is all kind of jacked. That's because it's got a new GPU that it's looking at. So in just a second, that NVIDIA driver will figure out, hey, I've got another NVIDIA card in here, everything's good to go. So that resolution should change back. And when that does, we'll go ahead and look at the devices to make sure that it's seeing that GTX 1080. And there it goes. So let's pull up Task Manager here. And sure enough, NVIDIA GeForce GTX 1080, that's an 8 gig card. So let's go ahead and run this 3D Mark software again. And I'll be back with the results. All right, so we're through that warm-up phase again, and now we're seeing more like 40 to 50 frames per second. So I'd say that's a pretty fantastic improvement, close to 4 times the frames per second. So I'm going to go ahead and let this go ahead and run all the way through, and I'll be back with the numbers. All right, so here we are with the results, and as expected, the overall score went up and the graphics score went up, but the CPU score basically didn't change at all, and that's because the CPU didn't change. It's still the same CPU in here, but the fact that the overall score and the graphics score went up makes me believe that the CPU is not quite throttling the new GPU, the much faster GPU. So that's always a good sign. At some point, this number may stop climbing up. That's just because this thing just can't handle that much throughput through it. So I'll go ahead and get all these compiled, and what I'm actually going to do is I'm going to run the same test on a modern gaming laptop. And when I say modern gaming laptop, I mean one that's probably around $600-700 that you could go down to Walmart or Best Buy and buy today. Not top of the line, but still kind of the mainstream gaming laptop. And it'll be interesting to see how that fares up against this 10-year-old technology. So let me compile some results, and I'll be right back.
All right, so let's take a look at these test results and see how they compare to each other. So first, we're looking here at just the Alpha R2. So we can see the graphics score of 2031, the CPU score of 3630, and the total score of 2174. Now let's take a look once we add in that graphics amplifier. And you can see the graphics score jumps way up to 7160. The CPU score, as we saw, stayed about the same, but the overall result was much higher, so 6,263, and that's to be expected from that huge jump in graphics. The overall gaming experience is going to be better. So I wanted to compare these up against a relatively new budget gaming laptop, and by budget, remember I said about $700 in the store right now, and it's got a Ryzen 5 6600H processor with a RTX 3050 GPU, and let's see how those scores popped up. And the graphics score is 4811, so somewhere in between that 960 that was stock in that Alpha R2 and that GTX 1080. I think nobody would expect a 3050 to beat out a 1080 GPU. Those things are still strong, even if they are several years old. And we're going to see the biggest jump here with the CPU score. With a CPU that's 10 years newer in technology and a lot more efficient, we do see it almost doubled in speed. So 6498 rather than the 3600 that we were getting with the Alpha. And then the total score there of 5005 is not going to be quite as high as the Alpha with the graphics amplifier, but it's still pretty good. And again, this is just one simple benchmark that kind of tests gaming experience overall from both the CPU and the GPU side. But I find it interesting to see that the brand new laptop still can't compete with what was probably at the time a very expensive top-of-the-line graphics card. So I think that's to be expected. I don't even know what those graphic amplifiers cost when they came out. I'm sure they were extremely expensive, but it's good to see that they can still put out some power. So I think that's just about going to wrap it up for this one. I hope you found this interesting, had some fun with this Alpha R2. It's nice that I didn't even have to upgrade anything in it. I already had 16 gigs of RAM, had a decent processor. The only thing you could do is probably try to find a i7 7700 and put in there, but it's just not worth whatever you're going to spend on that to get a little bit more CPU power out of it. So it's pretty much fully upgraded. You could put a bigger SSD in there if you wanted to, but for right now, I think a small SSD for Windows and a bigger drive for, the rest of your stuff is going to be fine. So this was fun checking that out. Be sure to keep an eye out for when I jump onto that laptop. I'm not sure what it's got in it yet, but we're going to find out. So stay tuned for that. But that's going to wrap it up for this one. If you got something out of it, if you enjoyed it, I appreciate a thumbs up. I thank you as always for watching, and until next time, peace out and geek out.